was going to say, when I was about 7 years old, 1983, I got pulled out of school because my best friend's dad was going to take us to the opening weekend of Return of the Jedi. And so for me, as a young kid, going to see a film in the theater from a world that I loved. I'd seen Star Wars, I'd seen Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, excuse me, but to go to the opening weekend for Return of the Jedi, where there were fans lined up, for the energy was in the room, that theatrical experience was so powerful. It was so immersive for me just to sit there in the theater and to be inside of that world. I think it was just an impactful moment that I'll never forget. And that theatrical going experience, I think, has kicked off a lifelong journey for me to try to open more worlds into these kinds of stories for other audiences.
Yeah, and so Aaron, I guess specifically also now that we're moving into these immersive experiences, I think the shared experience also was kind of the thing, going to the cinema, being there with other people, and now we're seeing, location-based entertainment, again, to be able to share that with friends. How do we continue that, and where is that thread going?
Well, I mean, that has always been one of the basic tenets. I mean, story is about sharing a narrative. It always has been from the campfire, on. It's been about bringing people together and to sharing an experience. So for us, when we started, on the journey with Dreamscape, to be honest, our initial foray was looking at, what are the next generation platforms to which people engage with experience? And VR was a bit off-putting because it was the opposite of being able to share an experience. It was very, singular, and it was very siloed. So when I would put on that headset and you were alone inside of a world, these were, this is 2014, 15, which wasn't the beginning of VR, but it was sort of this wave that we're in. That lack of connectivity, that lack of collaboration, that lack of this kind of exchange really was missing. So when we started and when we experienced the ability to be inside of virtual worlds, to be able to collaborate with one another, to engage with full agency in this kind of freedom, well, that's when everything changed. I mean, and that was the aha moment for us, and how you could do that in an out-of-home way. And now, with networking speeds, be able to start really bring that in-home in a meaningful way. That is truly an engagement of story that can be shared, and it has a network effect to it. We see people wanting to bring people into it, to experience it, to really be connectors in that way.
Yeah, and from your perspective, as head of VR and being focused on these virtual realms, where do you see that kind of shared storytelling experience going?
Well, we always think about what is the fantasy that we can actually give to the audience. When we're asking someone to put on a headset, go whole process, it's not easy, it's not that simple for everybody. We need to really provide a really exciting value proposition. And so it comes down to what is the fantasy that this person actually wants to live out inside this world. So we're working on a big game for Ghostbusters, for example. And the idea is that we know that there's a lot of people around the world who really like the idea of busting ghosts. We see them at events and conventions. They cosplay all the time. Busting ghosts with your friends is fun. And so our goal is to fulfill that fantasy and give people a chance to live within that world, and physically, with a one-to-one mechanic, with their hands and their head and track, bust ghosts with friends. So it starts with what is the fantasy that we're trying to provide, whether it's Ghostbusters, whether it's Zombieland, whether it's any of the other worlds that are within the Sony catalog. How do we start with building a game, developing an experience that offers that fantasy?
And then around the IP too, let's talk a little bit about just these characters that people know and love, and how does these immersive experiences elevate that connection of an audience? You mentioned going to Star Wars and Return of the Jedi. What is that experience like now, going into these immersive realms and developing that? I don't know. I think it's a deeper relationship with the characters.
It's interesting, and I think this is really more your world. We work with IP. We're never trying to make you be anybody than who you are. right? So it is more about living inside of the story of the world. So it's being able to connect with those characters, it's being able to have that experience and transport you into that world, but you are always yourself. You are on your own journey inside of that larger environment of whatever that IP might be.
I think it's evolving. It's really evolving. With all the new technologies that are allowing the kinds of real-time connectivity for multiplayer games to exist in VR, what we're seeing about what people take away is changing. It's changing all the time. And it's a really interesting question. How much do we define the character, a Ghostbuster, for example, versus how much do we want the audience to bring of themselves? So what we try to do is we say, here's the shape. We know that a Ghostbuster has a proton blaster, has a ghost trap, has an ecto one, certain sort of shape to the experience, but we want the player, the user, to really be able to bring their own personality to the game. And I think that's what happens in gaming. You bring your own personality, and when you can get fully immersed, you sort of live within the shape of the core pillars of the game, but ultimately you have to bring yourself. And that interaction is what's going to lead to great memories and great experiences and great social value.
And so we never want to lead, obviously, with technology first, but I think that there are very different opportunities in storytelling, AR versus VR. And where do you see the trends of each, and what storytelling mechanisms are each of those technologies kind of unlocking for creators?
You know, for us, we are a full immersion VR company, so I'll speak to the VR of it. I think there's a lot of great applications for AR. It's not where we spend our time, so probably have less of a focus viewpoint on that, other than to say it's a different kind of experience. And the reason that we're so focused on VR is, when done correctly, it's that immediate suspension of disbelief. And once you can achieve that, once somebody progresses in, you move them into that world. You don't make it just a jump cut, but you move them in. So you put on that headset, and it might look like exactly where we're sitting. And then you step into the environment, and the world changes. We made that progression, and now you're there. You trick the mind, you're inside of it, and now you can actually play out the story. And we're more traditional and classic narrative architecture, looking at taking you on a prescriptive journey where you have agency, where you have interactivity, but we want you to feel something. We want to take you in and really try to embody sense. So for us, that's what VR provides, and it allows us to really take you into the story and immerse you and envelop you in it, and really have nothing else that competes for your attention.
I think part of this conversation has to be a definition or a redefinition of what story actually is. Story is a narrative at its most basic form, but how you tell stories has changed throughout time. If we look at the roadmap, AR, mixed reality, VR, linear interactivity, gaming, all the way back to the magic lanterns and the hand puppets in front of fires back in the caveman days, the technologies have changed and advanced, and the stories therefore have changed as well, the method of storytelling. So I think on the spectrum of where we're going, as technology unlocks more opportunities, the definition of story changes, and the audience ultimately decides what is valuable to them. Right? They're the ones who are either validating it with their purchase or with their time, but that's really where we need to go. So for me, AR, face filters, for example, if you had asked me 10 years ago if face filters was a method of storytelling, I probably would have said no, but now seeing how kids are using face filters and sending that around as a mode of communication, I think you have to consider that a type of story. VR is very different, to Aaron's point. It's immersive. It's isolating in many ways. It's intense. It's it's emotional. Most people, VR sessions are between 20 and 40 minutes. That's very different than watching a long-form piece of content. So every slice of the spectrum of storytelling, I think, aligns with a different technology, and it's all, it's a long map.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I do agree that it all comes down, we use storytelling as a catch-all term. And there's a difference between storytelling, story living, narrative, and where you go with this. So I very much agree with that. When we look at VR as a tool for storytelling, I talk about it from the ability to really take you on a narrative journey, right? And that's far more prescriptive than when you're talking about, being your own form of creator and creating your own content and face over and all of that. So there's a place for everything. We come at it from a particular angle. And it really is interesting to see what happens when you put these various technologies out into people's hands and see what they come up with and what their form of story is, how they define it, to your point, Jake.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Jake, it's interesting that you're talking about this evolution of storytelling, and there's many different pathways, but I think there's still so many that are emerging. You look at some of the, I'm going to say the word that would have set Ted off, the branching narrative, or the choose your own adventure, but world building, Aaron, you just talked about, story living when we were backstage. So how do you see some of those evolving, and what are you seeing, creators, who are really kind of pushing the envelope, where it's not the technology, but they're pushing the story in a way that's pushing the technology right along with it?
Yeah. When we were talking on the phone not too long ago, we were referencing what are the different technologies that allow you to really move an experience forward. And again, it's sometimes anathema to think about story and game, right, as we were talking about, because they're two different languages. One where you control the journey, and the other where you have no control, as the author you have no control over the journey. But there's certain mechanics that seem to be starting to fuse those languages that are able to bring them together. And a great one, I think we both talked about this, but have different reference points. Might be in eye tracking and using blink as a mechanic. Before your eyes is a great example of blink as a mechanic, but to take you through a story, through the journey of somebody's life, through a life cycle, right? So with each blink progresses you. Now you're still controlling that arc, right? The start point, middle, and end. But how you go through that and how it plays out is based on the user. It's based on the consumer. But as the author, you can still control what it is, what's the story that's underlying all of this. But you can use these different kinds of mechanics that are available through progression of technology to unlock that capability and give you more of a sense of connection, your own sense of agency to it.
I think one way that we think about it at Sony is how do we get our audience to feel something? That's the output that we want, whether it's fear from a horror movie or vertigo from being on top of a tower, or love or emotion, or discover something about themselves. That's the output that we want. And then you work backwards, understanding the platform and the technology that you're using to tell the story to put together the mode of directing someone towards a feeling. So for virtual reality, Aaron mentioned a great technology, eye tracking. The PlayStation VR 2 has a fantastic eye tracking technology that can unlock really cool game design to get the audience to feel something. The game that I reference is called Switchback VR, developed by a studio called Supermassive, and it's a horror game, and it's a don't blink game. Inside the headset, you're in a room, there's a blood scrawl on the wall that says don't blink. As you move through this room, and every time you blink, these very scary mannequins move closer to you and freak you out. So you've got to try not to blink. That's a unique technology that's created to feel freaked out and have fun. So it's a really nice virtuous cycle where the technology unlocks an opportunity for very creative artists, in this case Supermassive, to build something fun and exciting that outputs a feeling, and that's the ecosystem that we try to build on.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. One of my favorite games is Super Hot because it's visually stunning, these kind of crimson glass polygon creatures on a white background, and they move as quickly as you do. And so it adds that kind of that sort of game layer. I absolutely love that.
Great.
So talking about some of, you mentioned one specific project. Are there some other projects that you're seeing where you look and you went, wow, that was another really interesting story mechanic, or just a way of pushing the technology that you really hadn't seen before?
Yeah, I mean, listen, for us, technology should be there in service of the story and not the other way around, right? So just to do something because you can isn't the reason to do it. And it doesn't always need to be digital. It doesn't always need to be, cutting edge. I mean, one of the favorite experiences, actually one of the things that really drove us deeply into, this kind of to VR and immersion is very analog. Say Sleep No More. A great example of living inside of a story that is unfolding around you. And while the story is, the same, you can go and navigate and have a different experience every time. But the story that is there is the same. So I've seen a number of things that I love, from just the great story on top of a story with a vivid and beautiful production of RRR, like one of the best things that I've seen in ages, to something very analog like Sleep No More. There's so much happening, and there's such a creative time, and you just have to put these things out and let people start painting on the palette with the palette, see what they come up with.
I think world building is a term that we use, and it's applicable to what we do at Sony Pictures VR. Ghostbusters, this Rise of the Ghost Lord game, which is going to come out later this year, is the first time where a Ghostbusters franchise takes place outside of New York. It's in San Francisco. We're building on the world of the Ghostbusters. You've started your own new franchise in San Francisco. You and your friends, you've got to go out and do jobs and build up your headquarters and progress your weapons and get your tools. And of course, there's a big bad ghost lord who's part of the narrative within the Ghostbusters canon. But it's building on the existing world. There's callbacks, there's Easter eggs to the Ghostbusters franchise, to the upcoming movies and other projects that are within the world. So the idea of the brand and the franchise, we used to use the term transmedia a lot. I think that term is maybe less in favor than something like world building, but it all means the same thing. It's of a world, of an IP. How do the different touch points all both connect, stay faithful and authentic to the original brand and the vision holder of the original brand, but yet offer the audience something new, something unique that technology or platform can deliver.
So do you ever see a time, and this has been controversial with different people I've spoken to, where you take this world building construct and everything might be happening in real time, and maybe the director might have a path on how that sort of more linear version of the story might unfold, but do you see a point where we might give the users and consumers more agency, where they could actually kind of record their version of the story and kind of hop around in sort of different time frames? And from a production standpoint, that's a nightmare. But do you see a point where we really give more creative freedom to the audience, or is that just right now too challenging to actually do on a technical level?
Well, I think gameplay is that at its core. Again, for us, when I think about story, I think about narrative, I think about owning the structure and taking you on a journey and trying to direct you and make you see things and having things go around you, and having agency and interactivity, but not going off on a choose your own adventure, because then you lose control of the story and where we're trying to take you. Yeah, this is in a very classical architecture. Do I see that happening at Choose Your Own Adventure? Absolutely. Is that something that we're particularly interested in? Not so much, but there are avenues for that when you talk about world building that are relevant to us. When I look at the world of education, world building, creating a world. Now I take one of our entertainment titles, Alien Zoo, as an example. That was actually the first piece of entertainment, entertainment experience that we created at Dreamscape Immersive. It is now actually, that world is the basis of a biology curriculum in higher ed, so introduction to biology for majors and non-majors. If you're an Arizona State University student, you're taking introduction to biology partially inside of the world of the Alien Zoo. So you're using that to move across from entertainment into education, and there you are doing a different kind of adventure. You're having a different kind of exploration. but we're still taking you on a path where there is a point and there is a specific beginning and end, and there's a period on the sentence as part of the learning journey.
I mean, I think if the question is where do we allow audiences to create their own story, then I think virtual reality is right now an example of a very applicable answer to that question. Because within the worlds of Zombieland or Men in Black, Aaron and I worked on a Men in Black project at Dreamscape, there are some key touch points, chapters if you will, but ultimately the audience is going through it at their own pace, exploring the world, finding out elements of story that they choose, whether they retain it, whether they share it, that ultimately becomes their choice. But I think VR right now is actually probably the best way to deliver a fully immersive, open world experience within a box that feels like it has a narrative framework to it that you can kind of bump up against versus a prescriptive linear storytelling module like a movie or a TV show.
Yeah, Aaron, I'd love to go back to the learning piece because there's so much data that supports the way especially kids learn in these virtual environments and having this kind of self-directed, where they're led by their interest and their own curiosity. What is it going to take to really implement this kind of broadly in schools? Because there's the expense factor. I mean, there's just challenges, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the first challenge, and by the way, I should say, we're doing this. I mean, there are 6,000 students at ASU right now that are taking biology inside of virtual reality. Now, it is not solely, this isn't about replacing the teacher. This is supplemental. This is how you are able to afford great learning outcomes to different kinds of learners, whether you're a didactic learner or a visual learner, by giving you the sense of education through exploration, putting you into that world. Well, once you suspend disbelief, the mind is open and it receives. Not only does it receive, but it retains. And as you know, these experiences feel, when done correctly, feel like real memories. And what does that mean? That means you've got great mastery of learning material. You come out of it, it's not like when you would look at a book and be reading and realize you just read the same sentence 5 times over and over. When you're in this world, you're alive, and the synapses are firing, and you're touching, you're feeling, you're experiencing. So, 1, we're doing it. 2, we're seeing incredible outcomes where students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds are now performing and having learning outcomes that are the same as students that are coming from advantaged backgrounds. When you talk about world building, the fact that, well, one student may not have been able to travel more than 5 miles from their home in their life, and another might have been able to travel all around the world. Nobody's been to an orbiting, alien, wildlife sanctuary in the sky, in space. So it's a great equalizer. So we're seeing it happen. We're actually, our next, school that we're bringing Dreamscape Learn into is a K-12. And a lot of this, I think, was realized during the pandemic when just the prior means of delivering an education experience technologically fell flat, literally flat on a 2D screen. And I watched my kids, I watched them glaze over, and I just saw the disconnection happen and disenfranchisement. When you excite and you engage and you use story, again, and the fact of the matter is when you are emotionally engaged in the story, you learn, you experience it. It's really been an interesting journey. We see it happening.
I think it's visceral. Philip Rosedale, founder of Second Life, also had an experience with pyramids. He had an Egyptologist who's based in Los Angeles, and kids would go into the studio in San Francisco and Vive headsets, and be able to experience this, and it becomes part of their DNA. But I'd also love to hear from you in terms of, does that inspire also these kids to kind of grow up into these kind of creative realms? Because that's so important at the creator economy coming.
You couldn't have said it better. Number one, Jake and I both have kids around the same age, and we're talking, we watch them, They are native to these worlds. They come up and they are just so accustomed to communicating, collaborating, having their social experiences, on these connected platforms, be it Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever whatever it might be. So this is all native language to them. So not only are you teaching through it, but you're also teaching how to create this, because this is interdisciplinary. It's game design, it's sound, it's the coding and programming and animation and VFX, and it's bringing it all together. In fact, we've been offering, it has been offered a program at ASU again called Designing for Dreamscape, where you bring together students who all have sort of to bring a different element from the narrative to the world design to the sound, and now they're creating these things. And make no mistake, this is the language of the future. This is how story will evolve and develop in their hands.
And the job opportunities of the future too. I mean, that's what when I speak to young people who are interested in getting into the creative business, whether it's movies, television, or interactive, I always try to point them towards where we're seeing real growth in terms of product and spending and consumer behavior. So designing for, programming for, building for, doing artwork for interactive platforms that can ultimately have a storytelling element to them is really the exciting space to be that I see when I talk to young folks. And to Aaron's point, my kids, I've got twin 12-year-old boys. For them, this sort of diet of interactive tools, they've got consoles and screens, way more screens than they probably should have. Just what happens. They're a test case for them. It's market research.
And they're adorable, and you can't say no.
Can't say no. But we try to push them outside so they see
vitamin D. Like this.
Yeah.
Going outside.
But for them, they'll come home after school and throw on a VR headset and play Gorilla Tag with their buddy for half an hour after dinner. And there's one in one room, one in the other room, and the other guy's down the street. And that's how they play in the neighborhood. For a little while, I was kind of mourning the fact that my kids weren't outside, riding bikes and getting into trouble like I was when I was a kid. But I look at this and I say, this is the new way that these kids interact, and it's a piece of their whole digital portfolio.
It's natural, it's normal. It's also normal to not understand this new generation, because now I'm old.
We can feel better
by myself saying things that my parents said. But no, the truth of the matter is these are the way they engage, and it's made that more flat world where they are able to have connections with people far, far away, family and new connections. And it opens to culture, it opens to experience, and you just hope that they exist in responsible environments. Right? I mean, that's one of the things that you always want to be mindful of, and that we're always fearful of parents is, these open worlds can bring in a whole bunch of different kinds of activities. You hope you train them well, but no, it is natural language for them, and you have to engage it. Now, what's really interesting is to see how they, redefine story. And we sort of lament or I do at least, how difficult it can be to get somebody to engage in longer form programming. Everything is going, it is shorter. But it really does kind of, take you back to whether it was truly Hemingway or not that came up with that brilliant short, flash fiction, right? The shortest story, For Sale, Baby Shoes, never won, right? That was a journey. You feel something. It really does start to get you down and boil down to the essence. What is short form content making you feel? How do you engage? It's really, really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because the short form, I mean, even down to kind of TikTok, where it's just a short, sharp shock, but you can tell a story in 30 seconds, and how is that going to impact the way creators? First of all, it's very much democratized, right? There's all these creator tools, and they're more and more and more proliferating. And then I think even now with virtual production, when you're talking about jobs of the future, where do you see that going, and what is the impact that will have on, now you have no time constraints from, a minute to, you put something out there for 3 hours. Will someone go to the cinema to see it? Who knows? But maybe they'll kind of come in and out if it's more of a world construct. So where do you see some of that going?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about it is just the constant democratization. I come from, you know, for me, my journey and the thesis of everything that I've been interested in engaging is next generation platforms to which people engage with content experience. That's it. You know, and of an age where you can go back and remember when, you know, the cable box came. And then when satellite TV came, and when, you know, you went from the, you know, the acoustic modems to, you know, to cable or broadband, all of this just started to break down barriers. In the world of music, when it first started, you know, what it meant to actually get into a recording studio, to actually lay your thoughts down, was a big barrier to entry, right? And then that slowly went away, and you saw the same thing started happening in visual and media. Now it gets to the point where so many more people have access to tools that their, you know, ingenuity, their own form of expression, you can get put out there. And I don't think you can predict where it goes.
I think the shortest version for me of that answer is quality rises to the top. If there is choice, if the consumers have choice, right, not just 3 channels they can watch, but 1 million with all the different devices, and if the creators have tools to create, then you have high volume of content across every platform, and at the end of the day, the economics of a high supply, high demand world are ultimately, should be market driven. This is a very macro level discussion here, but quality should rise to the top, and quality in storytelling is ultimately something that makes you feel something. It's subjective, it's different for every single person. Which movie did you like, which movie do I like? But I think at the end of the day, quality rises to the top, and that goes for every single type of storytelling medium that we have.
And it's interesting because, you know, Ted and our pre-calls and both of you, all 3 of you, and I'm paraphrasing, but it really distilled down. It's like, great story will always be great story, and then it doesn't, like, the medium really doesn't